Hi everyone. I want to talk to you today about the concept of the self and how that relates to spirituality, and particularly how it relates to creating your own spiritual practice and your own spiritual path and that kind of thing. Because this is something that I've been thinking about on and off quite a lot over the past year. I'd say theories of the self and how I think about the self and myself is probably the main area where my academic research and my academic development has actually bled over into my actual personal practice. Because as I've said before, there's actually surprisingly little dialogue between those two aspects of my life and between those two ways in which I engage with spirituality and religion. They kind of are their own animals, and okay, they do inform each other in obvious ways and maybe sometimes in not so obvious ways, but for the most part there really is quite a sharp divide between what I'm doing academically and the thoughts that I've been developing academically, and particularly other people's thoughts and ideas and how they've influenced my thinking, and then the progress or lack thereof that I've been making kind of in my own personal spiritual practice. And this is one of the reasons why this year has actually seen me go through a bit of a spiritual slump, rather than actually forging forward and making progress with my spiritual practice, because even though I've been thinking a lot about religion and spirituality, it hasn't really bled over into my actual practice, into my individual, personal, private life. But this concept, the way I think about the self, really has been influenced. And I think that's because my own personal concept of the self was always a little bit shaky. I think this shift in thinking has been a long time coming, and I have on and off done quite a lot of thinking about what I really think about the self as a whole intact entity, as something to which I can actually return to, or something which I can find. And I think, like a lot of other people in this spiritual community and in the pagan community, and just in this general community to which I'm speaking, I think all of us to a large extent have kind of internalized and wholeheartedly kind of accepted a very sort of quite a new age understanding of the self, in that we see it as something that we are trying to kind of scrape away the top layers to find. For a lot of us, our spiritual practice and embarking on developing our spiritual practice is not so much, we don't so much see it as a construction or a creative project, but a project whereby we kind of want to push away, like almost an archaeological project where we want to kind of dig away, push away, kind of scrape away all of the influences, the outside influences that we've had during our lives. So maybe whatever religions we've been brought up in, or whatever other understandings or internalizations we've had of religion, the concept of religion during our lives, and to find this sort of core self, core truth that we have underneath all that, that is kind of where it's really at, that kind of reflects what we really feel about divinity, what we really feel about religion and God and so on, and life in general. And I wouldn't say that I used to completely go along with that. I definitely always saw my spiritual journey as being quite a constructive process, in that I wasn't kind of trusting the whole process just to listening to myself and engaging with what was already there. And this is definitely true of many of us pagans, and actually in the general spiritual community. Even though we talk as if the process is really about kind of attuning with ourselves and getting in touch with our intuition and getting in touch with our true selves, at the same time we do a lot of reading, we do a lot of searching and seeking, we spend a lot of time engaging with other material, with outside sources, and kind of developing a new bedrock of information and possibilities that we can kind of build our practice on. But at the very basic level of that process, I think we're looking for that feeling of clicking. We're looking for that moment where we think, yeah, that really resonates with me. That resonates, this particular type of practice, or this particular myth, or this particular whatever it is, that really resonates with something deep within me, that resonates with something about me, like my core being. It resonates with me on some very deep and innate and true level. And that is definitely something that I went along with to a large extent. And it's something that actually ended up causing me quite a lot of grief. And I mean, it's probably, I don't think I've overtly said this, but it's probably pretty obvious that where I'm going with this is that more than anything, in terms of my personal transformation, my academic research has led me down the road of starting to feel like really questioning that kind of basic assumption that there is something that is a sort of true, authentic core self, that there is something there to scrape away the layers over and find. And that is kind of where I've kind of settled with that for the moment, is that I feel like that doesn't really ring true for me anymore. And it's not just because I read a couple of books that question that concept. It's not just because I've been, delving into various different theories relating to postmodernism and social constructivism. And then that is all part of it. Those kind of theories demonstrate how much we are influenced by our surroundings and by society. They demonstrate how much the individual and how much each of us is really influenced, is connected to other people, I suppose. And in that way, it doesn't actually have to be a very nihilistic kind of concept, because the truth is, it might be, those kind of theories might question the idea that there is a sort of key, core, authentic self that we can find. But at the same time, they're reminding us that we are interconnected with other people and with our environment and with the planet. And that's kind of where I've been wanting to go with that. But just to backtrack a little bit, I wanted to say that this didn't come out of nowhere for me. It's not just because I read a couple of theories and kind of thought, oh, okay, I've been looking at this the wrong way the whole time. This is something that I struggled with a lot, even while I was trying to find my core self, even while I was going through the process of attempting to return to some core self of mine. I found myself, the more I tried to do it and the more work I did to find this inner self, this kind of true me, the more it just felt like sand slipping through my fingers, The more it just felt like there wasn't really one ultimate me there waiting for me in the first place. And things like trying to listen to my intuition, trying to do all those kind of practices relating to that, and that we encourage each other to do. It's possible that I was just overthinking it, but I think by getting so sucked into that concept, I ended up I almost felt like I had ended up leading myself on a wild goose chase. And that was something that was rather uncomfortable for me, that I found myself wondering, well, which part of myself is the real me? Or which part of myself is the part of me that I should be listening to? And which instincts and which reactions are stemming from that real me, that inner me, that core being? And which of them are coming from other parts like my shadow or, various other aspects of myself, personas and so on. And that became a source of a fair bit of anxiety for me, because I felt like I needed to be making all of my key decisions from this kind of core being, core self. And if I wasn't making my decisions from that place, they would be wrong, or I would end up regretting them and so on. And I think actually coming to this place now where I'm starting to embrace the idea that actually there may not be any core element of ourselves is actually very freeing, because it actually gives us a lot more permission and freedom to react the way that feels right for us in the moment, and not to keep trying to unravel that back to some idealized idea idealized notion of what we are as people, some idealized identity. And like I kind of touched on before, I think it also really connects us back to that idea that we are interconnected with other people, that we're not islands. And having that reminder in our lives is definitely not a bad thing. It it doesn't have to be nihilistic. It can actually turn around some very isolating feelings that can arise from feeling like decisions are ours to be made completely by ourselves, in contact with our core being, reminding ourselves that actually we are just kind of one cog in, or maybe a cog is a bit of a mechanistic term to use, but we're just kind of one wave in this huge ocean. It kind of reminds us that at the end of the day, there may not just be one right decision, and taking other people's feelings and other people's ideas and behaviors and reactions into under consideration, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. So the way I've kind of come to see it is that we are a product of our experiences and our actions. And that's not to say that I think that there's some indomitable core essence that is built up out of those things. I think, to me, and this is also an experiential conclusion as well as a more logical, philosophical one. When I am at my most meditative, when I'm feeling most connected, and when I'm really in that meditative state, and I feel really tuned in to cosmos, what I feel more than anything is that I have tapped into not a kind of higher self, but a thread that is kind of connecting my consciousness to everything else, to the consciousness of cosmos, to just consciousness as a whole. And that I'm kind of getting out of my own body and I'm out of my own mind. And it really has struck me in previous meditations and in previous spiritual experiences, how much everything that's going on in my actual physical brain, all of my memories and habits and abilities and all of that stuff, all the genetics, everything, all of that is just temporary, and it's a product of my physicality as a separated entity from other entities in this world. So it's kind of connected with the ego. And yeah, rather than feeling like I'm actually connecting to some higher me, some soul essence that is connected to other things, I really just feel like I'm tapping into the memory or the realization that there isn't a core me and that I am everything. So it's a very pantheistic realization. And that's been kind of very comforting to me. So yeah, all of this is not to say that we're not important as individuals, and it's not to say that we don't have our own unique view and perspective on the world, because obviously we do. You know, we all experience this world through our cognitive function, through our brains. So we experience it through our memories, through our experiences, through all of this sensory input that we're receiving all the time. And obviously all of that is completely constructed by society to a large extent, because most of what we do, most of what we experience in our human lives are completely dictated by the structure of the society that we're living in. But in terms of kind of personal freedom, I think there's a lot of talk in this community about the importance of finding our own personal power, finding our own autonomy. And a lot of us feel like coming to paganism or witchcraft or developing our own spiritual practice or whatever it is really an expression of our own kind of personal agency, that we choose something that resonates with us on some deep level, and because we are acting from a place of that resonance, we are expressing our own individual agency as human beings. So that kind of thinking is really what I have been coming to question. And more, and particularly in my academic research, more and more I'm looking at how even in areas of our practice where we most talk about are how individualistic it is and how expressive it is of our own personal experiences and our own individuality, we are actually always being influenced by each other. We're always being influenced by other people in the community, by the people who inspire us, by the books that we read, by the things that we encounter, by the society we're in. We're so immersed in all of that. And you know, I don't think that has to be a bad thing. I think it's important to point those things out. I think it's important to point out that the kind of autonomous self-expression that we might talk about doing is maybe not as autonomous or as separated from the rest of society or the rest of our community as we might like to think it is. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not, that expressing ourselves in the way that we do and in a way that feels individualistic to us isn't important, and that it's not transformational and that it's not profound. And because obviously we are all coming from our own perspectives and our own experiences, and I think it's important for us to put our mark on the wider pagan spiritual community. And even if I can, as an academic, point out where all the similarities are in those practices and in this community, you know, where I can kind of point towards certain homogenous aesthetics that arise or homogenous practices, how even though pagans talk about being very individual or very eclectic, that actually when you take a step back and look at the practices and the imagery and the symbolism, that it is actually all quite similar. You know, that's fine. That doesn't mean that we're not being authentic. It doesn't mean that it's not true that we are expressing our individuality. It's just that we're doing it from a particular context, or in a particular context, but then that's how everybody operates. We're all operating and within our own social structures, our own social contexts. And that's inevitable. Like, there's no way that we can't operate in a void. None of us lives in a vacuum. That's the reality of it. And I think even if the differences are relatively small in the kind of altars that we make and the kind of practices that we make and stuff, and even if I don't believe that that's coming from a human soul or a core being that's sort of innate and this kind of holistic thing that we can dig into ourselves and find, I still think it's really important to express ourselves in the ways that we can, you know, in our practice, on our altars. It's important to us to kind of integrate those experiences that make us what we are into our spiritual practice, and to give ourselves that feeling of, you know, yes, I have some level of agency, you know, I am expressing something that feels connected to everything else that I experience in my life, rather than trying to connect to something or being forced to connect to something that actually doesn't reflect our own personal experiences at all. So I think at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that having this realization initially made me almost panic a little bit and think, you know, oh God, what are we doing? Is there really anything meaningful behind all of this at all? And then I came kind of full circle to realizing, well, no, this is just a different way of looking at things, and actually it doesn't change the reality of how it makes us feel and the meaning behind what it is that we're doing at all. But I think what it has stripped away from me is, like I said, almost like this pressure that I used to feel to find some core being in myself, to find some true me that had to answer all the questions of life. And knowing that I can actually recreate myself in the moment, knowing that I'm not going to be hindered or directed by some constant version of myself, is incredibly freeing. And it also kind of hands me a huge amount of responsibility, because it means that I can't just let go of the wheel and think to myself, well, you know, my core being is an artist and is a writer and is spiritual and is all these things, and I can just let go of the wheel and eventually I'll, you know, go back on course because that's who I am innately. It reminds me that actually everything that I do and every single day, the way I act, the way I behave, that is who I am. That it's as simple as that. That is who I am. Like, yes, I also am my memories, I also am my past experiences and my past habits. But if I let go of a habit, and if I keep letting go of it and I don't come back to it, then it's not me anymore. It's not part of me anymore. And I'm not exactly sure where I'm going with this, and I feel like if I keep following this thought onto its logical conclusion, I'm actually going to end up making a video of double this length. So I'll kind of try and wrap it up from here. But yeah, this realization, or this paradigm shift that I've had, has really emphasized to me the importance of not waiting around for things to settle down, not waiting around for things to fall into place, and wait for that sort of inner core me to step up to the plate. I've kind of realized that, like, for example, the problems with anxiety and depression that I've been struggling with recently, for me, well, because it's not so serious that I feel like I require any outside intervention or help with this. It's a mild level that I can kind of cope with pretty much by myself, with a little bit of support and help from outside sources. But I kind of think in the past I used to have a very passive reaction to that, and I used to just sort of almost want to bury myself away and just let it kind of pass. And it's really become so clear to me recently that that's not the best way of going around it, and doing that is only going to ingrain certain habits that I definitely don't want to be ingraining in myself. And that the only way to kind of become the me that I want to be is not to let the bad stuff settle and dissipate. It's actually to get really serious about day to day saying, is this how I want to be living? And if it's not, then do something about it. Like, actually change those behaviors and change my habits in order to really strive actively day by day to make that happen, to make myself feel differently, to make my brain react differently to the input that it's receiving. And that is very, very true as well for me, for spirituality and feeling kind of reverent and feeling connected and just feeling connected, feeling tapped into divinity. That, yeah, I can't keep like waiting for a spiritual slump to pass. That my reverence and my connection to divinity is something that I create in every moment. It's something that I create every day. It's not, I don't see spirituality and religiosity as being a core essence of the human. I don't see it as something that we all kind of innately have in our brains, waiting for us to tap into. So it's not as simple as just kind of triggering the switch and letting the program roll, you know, just kind of letting that spiritualness pan out. It really is like a daily endeavor, and whatever I need to do to make that happen is what needs to be done in the moment, and it's not going to look the same from day to day. So maybe one particular daily practice isn't going to cut it. Like sometimes that will go stale, but yeah, like if I am just a bundle of experiences and actions channeling this crazy divine cosmic creativity, then yeah, I can't afford to be passive. I'm wasting a gift if I allow myself to passively submit to patterns that are basically habits that I'm reverting to, you know, reverting to old habits that I used to have. Yeah, it's just become so clear to me recently in connection with those ideas about the self, just how important it is to be active and to keep thinking, you know, what do I need to do today to feel reverent, and what do I need to do today to feel calm and creative and productive, and then just do it. Just try to step out of my own head or my own anxieties and my own restrictions enough to actually think, well, I don't have to do things the way I did yesterday. I can do things differently today because I'm a different version of myself, or I'm a different version of reality or of cosmos, a different expression of humanity every day.